3 weeks ago, my Uncle Vincent left a voicemail asking if I'd be interested in a family business opportunity. He hasn't spoken a word to me in 9 years. I saved that voicemail. I've listened to it maybe 40 times. Backstory. Quick as I can make it because you need it. My dad died when I was 16. Heart thing. Sudden. Nobody saw it coming. He and my mom split when I was 7 and he'd remarried, but he kept up with me. Every other weekend. Calls on Sundays, the whole routine. He wasn't rich. He owned a small equipment supply outfit with his brother Vincent, 2 vans and a warehouse off the interstate. And he'd put money away for years because he was that kind of guy. Envelope of savings bonds. Actual physical bonds. He was born in 1968 and never trusted anything he couldn't hold. When he died, there was a will. There was money set aside for me, his half of the business plus what he'd saved, which everyone at the funeral kept calling your future. Like a phrase you say to a kid so he stops asking questions. I was 16. I didn't know what any of it meant. I knew my mom cried in the parking lot of the funeral home for 20 minutes before she'd drive us home. And I knew Vincent shook a lot of hands and said the word arrangements a lot. Here's what I understand now that I didn't then. Because I was a minor, that money didn't come to me. It went into an account with an adult managing it until I turned 18. And the adult managing it was Vincent. Because my dad's will named him. Because my dad wrote that will in 2009 when he still thought his brother was a decent man and my mom was going through a rough patch. Nobody updated it. Why would you? You're 42 and healthy. So Vincent had 2 years. 2 years where he was, on paper, the guy protecting my future. And what he did during those 2 years was buy out my dad's half of the business from the estate, from himself, meaning he decided what my dad's half was worth and then he paid that amount. And then he owned the whole company. And the money sat in an account he controlled. He was allowed to do it. That's the part that still gets me. He didn't sneak. He filed things. He signed things. He did it in daylight with a pen. And the number he decided my dad's half was worth was low. I know it was low because I've spent 9 years learning exactly how low. But that's not even the thing. The thing is what he did with what was left. Between when I was 16 and when I turned 18, Vincent invested my money into the business. His words at the time to my mother, in her kitchen, while she stood there with a dish towel because she'd been washing up when he knocked. He explained that leaving money in a savings account was throwing it away, that a boy my age would blow it all on a car, that he was going to grow it for me, and when I was ready, when I'd shown some maturity, we'd talk about my share. My mom pushed back. I want to be clear about that because I know how this sounds. She asked him for account statements. She asked him to put it in writing. She called a lawyer, actually, a guy in a strip mall office who told her that fighting a named trustee costs money up front, real money, thousands, and that she'd probably lose and definitely be broke. My mom worked nights. We rented. She didn't have thousands. She had a Corolla with 190,000 miles on it and a coupon organizer. So she did what she could, which was write him letters and get ignored. I turned 18 on a Thursday in October. I remember because it was a school day and my mom made a cake anyway and I ate 2 pieces standing up. I called Vincent that weekend. Sunday afternoon. I'd practiced what I was going to say in the shower like an idiot. He was cordial for about 90 seconds. Then I asked about my dad's money and everything changed. He told me the business had been struggling. He told me there'd been considerable expenses and that I clearly had no concept of what it cost to run something. That money isn't a pile you dig into. That my dad would be embarrassed watching his son call up asking for a handout before he'd worked a day in his life. I said it wasn't a handout. It was mine. And that's when he said it. He said, "Nothing is yours. You've never earned anything." And then, and I have never once forgotten the exact wording, he said, "You'll never amount to anything. You're your mother's kid, not your father's." That's the reason, by the way. That's the whole reason. And it took me years to see it clearly. Vincent hated my mother. Not disliked, hated. Because when my dad and Vincent started that business in the 90s, my dad put in the seed money. And the seed money came from my mom's side, from her father, who'd sold a duplex and handed it over because he liked my dad. Vincent came in with nothing but his hands and his opinions. For 20 years, he had to live with the fact that the business only existed because a woman he considered beneath the family had a father with a duplex. And then my dad and my mom split. And my dad still kept me and her in the will. And Vincent never got over it. When he looked at me, he saw the debt he never wanted to owe. He also, I think, genuinely believed I'd be a screw-up. Everyone in that family talked about me like I was already a disappointment they were being polite about. I was a quiet kid with a C average whose dad had just died. To Vincent, that was a full personality profile. So, 18 years old, on the phone, being told I was nothing. And here's the part where you're all going to want to yell at me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry on the phone. I said okay, and I hung up. But I want to be really clear about what okay meant, because I've seen posts on here where people say they let it go and moved on and found peace. That's not what happened. I have never let it go. Not for 1 week. I hung up that phone and I sat on my bed and I decided, that day, at 18, in a rented house with a cake in the fridge, that I was going to own everything he had. Not get my money back. Own it. Him, sitting in a room, understanding. Because here's what I figured out on that phone call. He wasn't lying about the business struggling. He was bragging in the shape of a complaint. He wanted me to know he'd spent it and that I couldn't do anything. That's what considerable expenses was. That was a man telling me he'd eaten my inheritance and daring me to prove it. I couldn't do anything at 18. I had no money, no standing, and a lawyer had already told my mom the door was closed. So I did the only thing available, which was learn. I went to community college for 2 years and then finished at a state school. And I picked what I picked specifically because I wanted to understand how a man takes something using paperwork. I worked at a distribution warehouse the entire time, which mattered more than the degree, because that's where I learned what Vincent's business actually is underneath the letterhead. Vans, contracts, invoices, and a customer list that's really just relationships with about 9 people. And I paid attention. This is the part that took the longest, and I want to explain it properly because there was no dramatic discovery, no folder that fell out of a cabinet. It was 9 years of small things, like my cousin Fraser, Vincent's son, 2 years older than me. Fraser and I aren't friends, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was working some long con on my cousin, because I wasn't. But Fraser posts. Constantly. He has for a decade. And when you scroll a man's Instagram back 9 years the way I have, you start to see a business's whole financial history in the background of his life. New truck in 2019, boat in 2021, with Vincent grinning next to it. The house Fraser bought in 2022 that he captioned about being blessed. Then, starting around 2023, the posts get quieter. The boat stops appearing. There's a photo from last spring where you can see the warehouse behind him, and there are 4 vans in the lot, when there used to be 11. Like, my Aunt Gina, Vincent's wife, who has never once been unkind to me, which is somehow worse. Gina calls my mother twice a year. My mother, to her enormous credit, takes those calls because my mother is a better person than I am. And Gina talks. She talked about Vincent taking out a second line on the house in 2023. She talked about Fraser and Vincent screaming at each other over a supplier. My mom would hang up and tell me, not as intel, just as gossip, because she doesn't know what I'm doing. She still doesn't know. I've never told her. Like Phoebe, who's been my girlfriend for 4 years, and who thinks this is the single ugliest thing about me. She's told me so. She asked me once, at her sister's wedding of all places, whether there was any version of my life where I just didn't do this. I told her no. That's still an open wound between us and I don't have a good answer for her. So that's 9 years. A degree, a warehouse job that turned into something better, a savings account I have not touched for anything fun since I was 22, and a man across town slowly running my father's company into the dirt while telling everyone at family barbecues that he's carrying the whole family on his back. I turned 27 in October, and in June, Vincent left me that voicemail, first contact in 9 years. Wants to talk about a family business opportunity. He thinks he's calling a nephew who doesn't amount to anything. I called him back. I said I'd love to hear about it. I'll post the rest. Update 1. Okay, first off, a lot of you told me I sound like a man who's wasted 9 years of his life on a grudge. Fair. Phoebe agrees with you. She read the post over my shoulder and said the comments were doing her arguing for her. So enjoy that. But some of you also asked the smart question, which was, what does a guy with no leverage actually do for 9 years, besides scroll his cousin's Instagram like a weirdo? So let me answer that, and then let me tell you about the meeting, because the meeting happened and it went about how I expected, and also nothing like I expected. Here's the thing I understood at 22 that changed everything. I was working the warehouse job I mentioned, and part of that job was dealing with the guys who financed our fleet, not banks, not the ones with branches. The small outfits that do equipment leases for companies with 4 vans and a warehouse. The kind of lending where a human being looks at your paperwork and makes a judgment call. And I remember sitting in a break room eating a gas station sandwich when it clicked for me that a company like my dad's, like Vincent's now, doesn't actually own anything. Not really. The vans are financed. The forklifts are financed. The warehouse is probably leased or mortgaged. What Vincent owns is the right to keep making payments, which means somebody out there owns Vincent's obligations. And obligations get sold. All the time, constantly. That's the entire business. I want to be honest that this was not a lightning bolt. It was a slow, boring realization that took about 2 years to fully form, and for most of that time it wasn't a plan, it was just a thing I chewed on while I couldn't sleep. Because at 22, I had $11,000 and a hand-me-down Ford Focus. You can't buy a company's paper with $11,000. You can barely buy a transmission. So I did the unglamorous thing. I stayed at that job, then moved up in it, then moved to a better one in the same industry, and I saved with a discipline that I am aware is not normal. Phoebe and I have been together 4 years, and we split rent on a 2-bedroom because I would not spend the money on a house. I drive a 2016 Camry that I bought outright. I have not been on a real vacation as an adult. My mom thinks I'm frugal because we grew up broke, and there's some truth in that, but it's not the truth. And here's where I have to admit something ugly, because this sub deserves the whole thing. Around 2023, I stopped just saving. I started reaching out, slowly, carefully, to the people who hold paper on small operations in my area, in the exact way a guy in my line of work legitimately would, because that is my actual job and I am actually good at it. I'm not going to pretend that was innocent. It wasn't. I was building a picture of who holds what, and I was making sure that when the day came that somebody was looking to unload a bad position on a struggling little equipment supply company off the interstate, my name would be in a phone somewhere. That's it. That's the whole scheme. 9 years of being patient and boring and never once forgetting a phone call from when I was 18. Anyway, the meeting. Vincent picked the place, which told me something on its own. He picked a diner out by the highway, the kind with laminated menus and a pie case that rotates. 9 years, and he picked a diner where a coffee costs $2. The man used to insist on steakhouses when he wanted to make a point. I clocked that before I even sat down. He looked older, obviously. He's 58 now, but not old man older. Worn. He'd gotten heavier, and his hair had gone completely, and he was wearing a company polo on a Saturday, which if you know anything about men like Vincent is a tell. The polo is a costume. The polo says, I am a man with a company. You don't put on the costume when things are good. You put it on when you need someone to remember. He shook my hand and said I'd filled out, that I looked like my father. That was the opener. My father, dead 11 years, deployed in the first 15 seconds. Then he did 20 minutes of nothing. Asked about my mother in a way that was clearly a formality. Asked what I did, and when I told him, he nodded like a man being told about a hobby. He said something about how everybody's in logistics now. Everybody's got an app, nobody makes anything. He told me about Fraser, how Fraser's coming along, how Fraser's got ideas but doesn't have the stomach yet. He said the word stomach twice, and I sat there, and I let him. That was the hardest 20 minutes of my adult life, by the way, and I want you all to appreciate that I ate a plate of eggs while a man told me about his stomach. Then he got to it. The pitch was this. The business is at a crossroads. Big companies are squeezing the little guys. He's been carrying it alone because Fraser isn't ready and Gina doesn't understand it. And he's been thinking about family, about legacy, about how it was 2 brothers who built that thing and there ought to be 2 names on it again. He said he'd been watching my career. His words, watching my career, which is a fascinating thing to say to someone whose calls you didn't return for 9 years. He said there was a place for me, not charity, a real role. Come in, learn the operation from him, and over time we'd talk about equity. Over time. We'd talk about equity. He said it, and he looked at me and I understood, with total clarity, that he thought he was doing me a favor. So I asked him the question I'd been saving. I asked calmly, over eggs, what happened to my father's money? And this is where it got interesting, because he didn't get angry. I expected anger. 9 years I've been rehearsing what I'd say when he got angry. Instead, he got sad. He put his fork down, and he did this whole thing where he said he was glad I asked, that he'd wanted to talk about it for years, that he'd handled it wrong. He said he was a younger man then, that he'd been grieving his brother. And yeah, he used grief. He actually deployed his own grief at me, and that he'd made decisions he'd make differently now. But then, and here's Vincent. Here's exactly who he is. He explained that the money was in the business. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was in the vans and the building and the accounts. It was in there. And the only way to ever see it was to come be part of it. He wasn't stealing it. He was holding it. For me. All these years. He'd turned it into a favor. He'd been keeping my inheritance safe by spending it. And now he was generously offering to let me come work for it. I asked how the business was doing. He said fine. Tight, but fine. Everybody's tight. I asked how many vans he was running. He said we were talking about a career, not counting vans. I asked again, how many vans? And he told me it fluctuates. Reader, I know how many vans. I've known for a year. So I said I'd think about it. That's all I said. And he clapped me on the shoulder in the parking lot and said something about how good it was, how his brother would have wanted this, and he got into a Silverado that I would put money on being 3 payments behind. Now, the part where it got out of my control, because I made one mistake. I told my mother about the lunch, not the plan, just the lunch. And I did it because I was going to see her that Sunday anyway, and because she deserved to hear Vincent's name from me and not from Gina. She did not take it the way I thought she would. I expected her to be angry at him. Instead, she got angry at me. She sat in her kitchen, same kitchen, and I know she was thinking about the dish towel, we both were. And she asked me what I was doing. And when I said I was just listening to an offer, she said the thing that has been sitting in my chest for 2 weeks. She said she'd watched me become somebody who checks his cousin's photos. She said she'd known for years that she's not stupid, that a person doesn't ask that many careful questions about a family they claim not to care about. She said she gave up on that money in 2015 so that I could have a life, and instead I built my whole life out of it anyway. And then she said, and this is the one that got me, she said she didn't want a single thing that came out of Vincent's hands. Not for her. Not for me, that if I brought her a check from that man, she'd tear it up. I told her it isn't about a check. She said she knew that. She said that's what scares her. We didn't finish that conversation. I left. I've called her twice since, and she's talked about normal things and been completely pleasant and has not brought it up once, which anyone with a mother will recognize as significantly worse. And then Fraser messaged me. Instagram DM, which, yes, I know, the guy whose posts I've been studying for 9 years. I'm aware of the irony. Several of you will enjoy that. He was not hostile. That threw me. Fraser and I have basically nothing, but he messaged me like we were teammates. He said Dad told him about lunch. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he thinks it's good and that I should know he pushed for it. He pushed for it. And then he said the sentence that has completely rearranged what I thought was going on. He said things are worse than Dad's telling me. And if I come in, I should come in with my eyes open. And could we talk before I gave an answer? Fraser is not helping me. Let me be very clear because I know how this reads. Fraser wants something. Fraser is 30 and has a house he called blessed and a father who says he doesn't have the stomach yet. Fraser has spent his whole life being the son of a man who tells people his son isn't ready. Whatever Fraser is doing, he's doing it for Fraser. But he offered to tell me the actual numbers. Voluntarily. Before I've agreed to anything. The nephew who'll never amount to anything is about to be handed his uncle's books by his uncle's own kid. I agreed to meet him. More soon. Update 2. Right. Fraser. Let's talk about Fraser because half of you called him a trap and half of you called him a gift, and honestly, you're both correct. He wanted to meet at the batting cages. I'm not making that up. There's a place off Route 9 with cages and mini golf and a snack window, and that's where my 30-year-old cousin wanted to discuss his father's finances on a Wednesday evening in the summer. I got there and he'd already bought a token bucket. He didn't hug me. We haven't hugged since maybe 2011. And for about 15 minutes, he just swung at balls and talked about nothing. His knee. A guy we both went to school with. Whether I still played. This is a family that cannot approach a subject directly. It's genetic. I do it too. I'm doing it right now, to you people. Then he stopped and leaned on the bat and said the thing. He said his father's going to lose the building. Not the company. The building. The warehouse off the interstate. The one my dad's seed money, my grandfather's duplex money, helped buy in the 90s. Vincent refinanced it. Twice. The second one in 2023, which lines up exactly with what Gina told my mom about a line on the house, except it wasn't just the house, it was both. He'd leaned on everything he had at the same time. And Fraser said the payments are current, but they're current the way a man is current when he's paying one thing with another thing. Then he told me the number. The actual monthly nut on the whole operation, building and fleet and everything. And then he told me what came in last month. I'm not going to post the numbers because I'm not a complete idiot. But I'll tell you my reaction, which was that I put my hand on the fence and I stood there for a second, because I had spent 9 years assuming this man was slowly bleeding out, and it turned out he'd been bleeding out fast for about 3 years and doing an incredible acting job at family barbecues. And here's what I actually felt, and you can all judge me. I was relieved. Not sad. Not vindicated even, not yet. Relieved. Like a guy who's been carrying something and got to set it down for a second. My uncle told me I'd never amount to anything. And 11 years later, his son is telling me at a batting cage that his father can't cover the building my grandfather paid for. So then I asked Fraser the only question that mattered. I asked him why he was telling me, and he gave me an answer that was about 40% honest, which for this family is a personal record. He said he's been trying to get his father to change how they operate for 4 years. that he wanted to drop two of the low-margin accounts and go after a different type of customer. And Vincent shot it down every time, and not with a business argument, with the stomach thing, with "you're not ready," with "when you've done this as long as I have." He said his father has never once let him make a decision that cost more than a few $100s. He's 30. He's been there since he was 22. He has a house he can barely carry because he bought it in 2022 assuming his salary would go up, and his salary has not gone up because his father decides his salary. And then Fraser said it. He said if I came in, if there were two names on it again, his father would have to listen because Dad respects the business, Dad doesn't respect people, and the business would be half mine. So Fraser's plan was to use me as a crowbar on his own father. He wasn't handing me anything. He was recruiting me into being his ally against Vincent because he spent 8 years losing that argument alone, and he figured a second nephew-shaped person in the room might finally make his dad hear him. I want to be fair to Fraser here, and this is hard for me. He was never cruel to me. He was a kid too when my dad died, and he spent his whole adult life being told he doesn't have the stomach by a man who has, in fact, no stomach for anything except telling other people they lack it. There's a version of Fraser I could feel sorry for. That version isn't the one who's had my father's money in his driveway since 2019 in the shape of a truck. So, I told him I'd think about the offer, and I asked him a lot of specific questions about who they leased the vans from and how the building note was structured. And I asked them the way a guy asks when he's excited about coming aboard. And Fraser answered every single one because Fraser wanted me aboard. He gave me an hour of detail that I could not have gotten any other way in 10 years. He kept saying we, this early. We could fix the routing. We could drop the two accounts. I drove home doing the math out loud in my car like a lunatic. Now, the family part, because it got so much worse, and this is the stuff that's actually keeping me up. Gina called my mother. Regular twice-a-year call, except it wasn't June anymore, and it wasn't the schedule, so it was a call with a purpose. And Gina, who has never once been unkind to me, spent 40 minutes telling my mother how good it would be for the boys to work together, how Vincent has regretted things for years, how he's not good at saying things, how a family shouldn't let money be the reason. My mom listened, and then she told Gina, and I only know this because my mother told me herself, in a completely level tone, on the phone, while she was folding laundry. She told Gina that Vincent knew exactly what he was doing in 2015 and that a man doesn't accidentally cut a 16-year-old out of his father's estate. Gina told her that's not what happened. Gina said the business would have gone under without that money, and then there'd have been nothing for anybody. So what Vincent did was actually the responsible thing, which, and I need you all to sit with this, is the first time in 11 years that anyone in that family has admitted out loud that he used my money to plug a hole. Not invested it, plugged a hole. Gina thinks that's a defense. She genuinely thinks that's the good version. And my mother, God bless her, said, okay, and got off the phone, and then called me and told me all of it, and then said, now you know, and now you can stop. Because that's her whole position. She thinks knowing was the point. She thinks I've spent 9 years chasing an admission, and now that I have one, I can put it down. I told her I'm not doing this for an admission. And she said she knows. She said that's the problem. She said she raised me in a rented house on night shifts, and I turned out exactly as hard as the man who did it to us. And she'd rather have had a son with nothing. That one landed. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I sat in my car outside my own apartment for 20 minutes after that call. But here's the thing. And this is where I'm apparently the villain of my own post. She's wrong. Vincent didn't get hard because someone stole from him. He got hard because a woman he looked down on had a father with a duplex and he had to say thank you for 20 years. That's not the same. He built his whole personality around resenting a debt he benefited from. I'm not resenting anything. I want the thing back. And then Phoebe. Phoebe and I had the worst fight of our 4 years. On a Friday night, over the batting cage. Not the numbers. The batting cage. Because I came home and I was uppy. I was lit up. And she watched me at the kitchen counter talking a mile a minute about van leases, and she asked me when I'd last been that excited about anything to do with her. And I didn't have an answer. That's the honest truth. I stood there, and I didn't have one. She said she's been waiting 4 years for the part where this ends, and I become a person. She said she's not asking me to forgive him. She's never once asked me to forgive him. She doesn't care about him at all. She said she'd help me set his building on fire if that's what it took. And then she said, but it won't take that, because it isn't about the building. It's about a phone call when you were 18 and you're going to be 60 and still on that phone call. I told her the money is her life too. The house we don't have. I said the word future, and she laughed at me. She said that's his word. That's what everyone said at the funeral. Your future, your future. She wasn't wrong, and I said something back that I'm not going to type out because it was cruel, and it was about her family, and I meant it when I said it. She slept at her sister's. She's back now. We're being extremely polite to each other. So here's where it stands. Fraser wants me inside so he can finally beat his father in an argument. Gina wants a family Christmas where nobody's uncomfortable. My mother wants me to walk away and doesn't want the money if I don't. Phoebe wants a man who is not this. And Vincent wants a competent nephew he can pay under market to save the company he stole from me, while telling me he's doing me a favor, while calling it legacy. Everybody at that table wants something from me. Not one of them has offered me a single thing. And all four of them think the question on the table is whether I'm going to accept Vincent's offer. It isn't. It hasn't been for a while. Because 2 weeks before Vincent ever left me that voicemail, I got a call from someone in my industry about a position on some paper that had gone sideways. Small equipment supply company, off the interstate. I'll finish this in the next one. Final update. So, the call I mentioned at the end of the last one. Let me explain what it actually was because a bunch of you have theories and most of them are wrong and one of you got it exactly right and I hope you're proud. 2 weeks before Vincent left me that voicemail, a guy I've dealt with for years in my actual job reached out about a position he wanted off his books. This is normal. This is Tuesday. Small lenders do this constantly. They hold a note on some little company. The company starts limping, and rather than spend 2 years chasing it, they sell the position at a discount to someone who'll take the headache. I've been on the receiving end of these calls since 2023. I told you I'd made sure my name was in phones. This is what that meant. Except this one was the building, not the vans. The vans are nothing. The vans are 100 payments and a phone tree. The building off the interstate, the one my grandfather's duplex bought in 1996 for two brothers who had nothing but a truck between them. And I want to be completely clear because I know exactly how this reads. I did not go looking for it that week. I built a 9-year machine designed to make that call happen, and then I sat there for 9 years, and it happened. Those are two different sentences, and they're both true. Here's the part I've been holding back all 3 posts, and I'm sorry, but you'd have done the same. I didn't get it in June. I got it in April. I closed on that position in April, with every dollar I've saved since I was 22, plus a partner from work who came in for a chunk because he looked at it and said the numbers were fine and he liked the asset. It took 11 weeks. There were appraisals. There was a lawyer who charged me by the 6 minutes to explain things I already understood. It was the least dramatic thing that has ever happened to me. I signed a stack of paper at a folding table, and then I went to a Chipotle. So when Vincent left me that voicemail in June about a family business opportunity, I already owned the note on his building. I had owned it for 7 weeks. He called me to offer me a job in a warehouse I was the lien holder on. That voicemail is the funniest thing I have ever received in my life, and also, I've listened to it 40 times, and I don't think I've smiled once. Now, here's why he called. This is the part I only understood later, and it's better than I thought. He didn't call me because he was feeling sentimental about legacy. He called me because his note got sold and the servicing changed hands, and he got a letter about it, like anybody would. And he saw an unfamiliar entity name, and he panicked. He didn't know it was me. My thing isn't named after me, it's named after nothing. It's 2 words a lawyer suggested. But he knew a stranger had his building. And Vincent's entire theory of survival his whole life has been that he can talk a person into things. He couldn't talk to a stranger. So he went looking for the nearest asset he had left. And the nearest asset was a nephew in logistics who might know people. That's what the diner was. That's what watching your career was. He wasn't offering me my father's company. He was trying to hire me as a translator to go negotiate with myself. That's why the diner instead of the steakhouse. Not humility. He couldn't cover the steakhouse. Okay, the confrontation. You've waited 3 posts. I didn't ambush him. I want to say that. I called him on a Sunday afternoon. Sunday, same as when I was 18, and yes, I picked it. I'm not going to lie to you people at this stage. And I asked him to meet me at the warehouse. He was pleased. He thought I was coming to say yes. He told Fraser to come too because he wanted a witness to his own generosity. So it was 3 of us in that office. Wood paneling. A photo of him and my dad from probably 1998 on the wall behind the desk, which he kept it. 11 years. He kept a photo of the man whose kid he cleaned out. He started in immediately. He'd clearly prepared. He talked about a title for me, about how we'd do it slow, about how I'd need to unlearn some things, but he could see my father in me. Fraser sat there. Fraser kept looking at me because Fraser thought we had an arrangement, and I let him finish. All of it. Every word. And then I put the paperwork on his desk and I told him I wasn't there about a job. I was there because I hold the note on the building he was sitting in, and I wanted to discuss the terms. He didn't understand. That's the honest truth, and it's the part I've replayed the most. There was a solid 10 seconds where he was still smiling, because his brain refused the sentence. He picked up the top page and read it, and then read it again. He looked at Fraser. Fraser hadn't moved. Then he laughed. He said this was a stunt. He said a person doesn't just buy a note. And I said, you're right. A person doesn't. It took 11 weeks and a lawyer and every dollar I've had since I was 22. And he sat down. And then, and I'd braced for the anger. I had a whole speech for the anger. He went the other way. He got warm, fast. He started talking about my father. He said Dad would be proud, that this is exactly what Dad would have done. Look at you. Look at what you did. He was trying to fold it into the story where he'd made me. Like I was the product. Like 9 years of me hating him in silence was his mentorship program. So I said the thing I'd had loaded since I was 18 years old. I told him, you told me I'd never amount to anything. You told me I was my mother's kid, not my father's. And you were half right, because it was her father's money that bought this building, and you've never in your life said thank you for it. And that's the only reason you've hated me since I was born. And he didn't deny it. He said her family always thought they were better. 11 years, a folding table, a lawyer, and the man just says it out loud in his own office like it's obvious. Then he tried the last thing. He said the family would never forgive me, Gina, his sister-in-law, everyone, that I'd be the one who took a man's company, that people would remember. And I told him what the terms were. Here they are, since you asked. And this is where a lot of you are going to be disappointed because it isn't a movie. I'm not foreclosing. I told him I'd hold the note. Current terms, no change, as long as he's not the one running the company. He signs the operations over to Fraser. Full authority, real salary, actual decisions. Vincent keeps his equity, keeps his paycheck, keeps his title on the letterhead, keeps the photo on the wall. He just doesn't get to decide anything, ever again. Because I thought about foreclosing. For 9 years I thought about foreclosing. But if I take the building, he gets to be a man who was destroyed by his greedy nephew, and he'd tell that story at every barbecue until he died and he'd love it. It'd be the best thing that ever happened to him. This way he sits in that office in his polo, in a company with his name on it, and every single decision gets made by his son and approved by me. He has to ask. For the rest of his working life, he has to ask the 2 people he spent his whole life telling weren't ready. And he took it. Of course he took it. He took it in about 4 minutes, which tells you everything about how bad it was. And then he asked me, and this is real, he asked me whether I'd be at Christmas. The rest of it, quickly, because it's not clean. Fraser got what he wanted, and he hates me. That's the thing nobody warned me about. He's got the authority he begged for, and he knows he got it as a gift from the cousin he tried to use as a crowbar, and he can't stand it. We talk weekly. It's about routing and accounts, and it's fine, and it's completely dead. I don't think we'll ever be anything. Gina calls my mother more now, not less, and cries, and tells her Vincent doesn't sleep. My mother listens to every minute of it and reports none of it to me anymore, because my mother won't take $1. I offered. I sat in that kitchen and offered, and she said what she said she'd say, and she meant it, and she was pleasant about it, and she asked if I wanted coffee. She's not angry. She's just done with the subject. That's my punishment, and it's a good one, and I've earned it. And Phoebe. Phoebe's still here. We're in the same apartment being kind to each other, and she asked me last week whether I feel better now, and I told her the truth, which is that I don't feel anything, I just don't have anywhere to put it anymore. She said that's what she was afraid of. We're going to be okay, or we're not. I've stopped predicting. Someone's going to comment that I should have let it go at 18 and had a life. Maybe. I've read that comment about 400 times in my own head since 2015. But I was 16 in a funeral home hearing grown men say the word future at me. And then a man took it and told me I was nothing. And I promised myself in a rented house that he'd have to look at me one day and know. He looked at me. He knew. He was right, by the way. I never did amount to anything. I just amounted to everything he had.